A handful of families controls everything. One resource, without which civilization simply stops. Wars that last for decades. People who live in the richest lands on the planet and die in poverty. Leaders who arrive with promises of liberation and build new empires. You just watched a film about the distant future. No, you watched the news feed. Herbert wrote it in 1965. We still call it fiction, because calling it reality is too uncomfortable. Hi, I am Vadim Jason. This is Lore Navigator. Today we are not going to admire film. We are going to look in the mirror, using the film as a lens. And I promise, by the end of this video, you won't be able to watch Dune the same way again. Let's go. Frank Herbert wrote Dune watching oil reshape the world. Denis Villeneuve filmed it faithfully, without betrayal. And in the spring of 2026, it doesn't feel like a warning about the future. It feels like a protocol of what has already happened. Today, layer by layer, spice, power, blood, religion as a weapon, and one question at the end that you won't want to ask yourself, but you'll have to. Spice, the substance that extends life, sharpens the mind, make interstellar navigation possible, literally. Without it, the guild can plot roads, and the entire imperial cosmos grinds to a halt. One substance, one planet, an entire civilization addicted. Herbert didn't hide where this came from. In interviews, he said it directly. Dune grew out of watching how oil works, how a single natural resource can determine the fates of nations, redraw political maps, justify any violence, simply because without it everything stops. 1973, OPEC turns off the tap, and the world's largest economy lines up for gasoline. The president calls kings, the Secretary of State flies across the Middle East like a courier. All the rhetoric about free markets and sovereignty evaporates within weeks, because without oil there's no army, no industry, no food on supermarket shelves. That's the price, not a metaphor, a literal description of the mechanism. But Herbert added something important. Spice changes those who consume it. Guild navigators become so dependent they transform into something inhuman, literally, physically. They gain the gift of foresight and pay for it with their form, their freedom, their ability to exist without the next dose. A civilization depends on a resource, a metaphor about economics. It's a metaphor about civilization itself changing. Countries that built their futures on oil didn't just get rich, they deformed. Institutions didn't develop because they didn't need to. Money comes from underground, not from citizens' taxes. Citizens didn't demand representation because the state fed them. Elites didn't diversify the economy because why would they? As long as it pumps the resource course. Economists have studied it for decades. Herbert described it in 1965 as science fiction. It's 2026. Oil isn't going anywhere, but alongside it, a new spice has emerged. Lithium, cobalt, rare earth metals. Without them there are no batteries. Without batteries there are no electric cars, no smartphones, no data centers, no artificial intelligence. The entire green revolution, the entire transition to clean energy that's supposed to save the planet runs on those metals. And they are concentrated in a handful of spots on the map. Chile and Argentina, the lithium triangle. Congo, 16% of the world's cobalt. China, possession and control of most rare earth elements. Several Arakises, the same principle. Children in the Katanga province mine cobalt for Tesla and Apple batteries. They live in the richest planet in the galaxy and die of thirst. This is not a coincidence. This is not a natural tragedy. This is a structure, deliberately built, maintained for decades, and resources always the same, only the name changes. And around it, always the same players, because the players are us. Look at the structure, not the characters. A handful of great houses, each controls planets, resources, armies. Between them, rivalry, alliances, betrayals. Above them, the petty Shah Empire who balances interests not out of fairness, but because equilibrium benefits those at the top. And separately, above everyone, the Guild and Bene Gesserit, who stopped playing open games long ago because they are operating at a different level entirely. This isn't feudalism from a history textbook. This is corporate oligarchy with private armies, literally. Replace house with transnational corporation and nothing fundamentally changes. ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, in the era of oil dominance, had their own intelligence services, financed corps, maintained private armies in unstable regions. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented history, public, available, just uncomfortable. Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. Vladimir. Herbert named him that in 1965. He simply wanted something cold, imperial, inhuman. In 2026, that name lands differently. The Baron isn't a Valiant. Valiant is too simple, too convenient. The Baron is an efficient manager of a resource colony. He understands one thing that many people prefer not to articulate out loud. On the periphery, where there are no institutions, no international scrutiny, no independent press, fear is cheaper than loyal, terror is more reliable than negotiation. This isn't sadism as an end in itself. This is operational logic. And if that sounds too cynical for the real world, look up the history of the United Fruit Company in Central America. All the activities of oil majors in Nigeria in 1990s, all the mining concession agreements in Congo right now. The Baron would have been perfectly comfortable there. And now the Atreides, and this will be more uncomfortable than the Harkonnens. House Atreides are the good ones. Lita is just, Paul is honest, they respect the Fremen. The entire film positions us on their side, and it works because Villeneuve is a brilliant director and Chalamet is a brilliant actor. But one question, why does Duke Leto go to Arrakis? Not out of love for the Fremen, not for justice. He goes because the Emperor handed him the spice production contract. He goes to manage a colony, just with better PR. Structurally, he's the same element of the same machine as the Baron, just with a different face, with a genuine desire not to be cruel. With a real empathy that doesn't change the system. This is Herbert's key point. A system doesn't change just because good people enter it. Good people adapt to the system, or the system destroys them. It destroyed Leto. Now one level higher. The Guild Navigators. They don't fight, they don't rule planets, they simply control transportation. And that's enough to stand above all the great houses combined. Because whoever control logistics control everything else. Maersk, MSC, Costco. 3 companies control more than half of global container traffic. Costco holds stakes in dozens of world's largest ports. From Piraeus to Hamburg to Long Beach. Guild Navigators. In the real world without the worms, there are no good houses in this system. There are more and less convenient faces in the same machine, and while we argue about which face we prefer, the machine keeps running. Arrakis is the richest planet in the galaxy, the only source of spice in the universe, and the native people of this planet live in caves, recycle their own urine, cry only for the dead, because the moisture of tears is too precious to spend on the living. This isn't harsh climate, not an unlucky geography, this is a political agreement. The wealth of Arrakis doesn't belong to those who live on it, and it never did. Venezuela, the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than Iran, more than Iraq. The country literally sits on oil. And over the last 20 years, more than 7 million people have left on foot. The largest migration crisis in the history of Latin America. People fleeing through the jungles and mountains from a country with the richest oil reserves on the planet. How is this possible? Very simple. The oil exists, but it never belonged to those who live near the rigs. First to foraging corporations, then to a state that used the revenues not to build institutions but to buy loyalty. When oil got cheaper, the system collapsed. There were no institutions, no diversifications, just the rig and the line for the exit. Arrakis in South America, right now. Iran, the 4th largest proven oil reserves in the world, an ancient civilization, an educated population, developed industry by regional standards, and a country that has lived under the sanctions for decades, precisely because it dared to say its oil belonged to it. 1943, Prime Minister Mossadegh nationalizes the oil industry. Within a year, a coup organized by the CIA and British intelligence, Mossadegh under house arrest for the rest of his life. The oil goes back to a consortium of Western companies. This isn't history as in long ago. This is documented facts, declassified by the Americans themselves. The Fremen tried to say the spice belonged to them. The great houses responded, the way great houses always respond. And today Iran is one of the clearest examples of what happens to those who try to leave the system without the system's permission. You all watched it in the news, not because the regime is good. The regime there is not good, but because control over the resource matters more than any rhetoric about democracy and human rights. This is the Padishah Empire maintaining balance, not out of fairness, out of interests. Venezuela, Iran, Congo, free Arrakis, one principle. The planet's wealth does not belong to those who live on it, and no one intends to change that. This is not coincidence, this is not natural tragedy. This is a structure, deliberately built, maintained for decades. Most people think Herbert modeled the Fremen on desert Arabs, Bedouins, tribal code, jihad. That layer is there, but Herbert dug deeper, in unexpected places. The Caucasian War, the 19th century, almost 50 years from 1817 to 1864, the Russian Empire tried to break the resistance of the mountain people of the Caucasus, Chechens, Dagestans, Caucasians, without a regular army, without artillery, without imperial resources, against one of the largest military machines in their time. They held for 50 years. Herbert was fascinated by exactly that, how a small people on harsh land develops tactics and psychology that allows them to resist a vastly stronger enemy for decades. How the harshness of the environment becomes not a weakness but a weapon. How every person is a warrior not by order but by necessity of survival. The Fremen are not just Arabs in a desert, they are mountain warriors, with their code, with their memory of every betrayal, with their ability to wait, and the second source even less obvious. Zaporozhian Cossacks, a people without a state, on borderland that everyone wanted to control. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Ottoman Empire, the Muscovite Tsardom. The Cossacks belonged to no one. They developed their own military code, their own democracy, their own identity, despite everyone who wanted to absorb them. The Zaporozhian siege stood on land that everyone claimed as their own, except the Cossacks themselves, who claimed it by right of blood and right of survival. The steel suit is not a spacesuit, it's a Caucasian code. It's a Cossack zhupan, the clothing of a person who made a hostile environment an ally, who learned not to fight the desert, but to think like the desert. When you know this, the Fremen stop being exotic. They become very specific people with a very specific history, with a very specific pain that Herbert saw and considered it universal enough to place at the center of his universe. And here, Villeneuve makes the most important choice in the entire film. Chani. In the book, Chani accepts the prophecy. She believes in Paul, or learns to believe. Villeneuve rewrites her. And this is genius. His Chani is the only character who sees that happening without illusions. An outsider from the north, beautiful, intelligent, says the right words, fights like a Fremen, knows the language, shares the food, and she still thinks, what does he actually want from us? Not, he will save us, not, he is chosen, but what does he want from us? That's the most politically astute question in the entire film, and the most ancient. History knows many Paul Atreides, people who came to oppressed nations, learned the language, shared the food, took local women as wives, became leaders of liberation movements, spoke with the right words about justice and freedom, and led those movements where it suited them, not the people. Every time the right words, beautiful promises, and a result that suited the great houses, not the Fremen. Chani sees this pattern instinctively because her people have lived inside it for generations. She is right. The only question is this: when we watch the screen and root for Paul, are we playing Chani, Or are we already shouting Mahdi and just don't notice it? You know what hit me on the second viewing? Herbert doesn't condemn the Fremen for believing. He shows they needed to believe. When you have no army, no money, no access to the system, faith in a Messiah is the last tool you have. It's not weakness, it's the rational choice of desperate people. And I'm not talking about Arrakis anymore. The Bene Gesserit are the coldest organization in the history of science fiction. Not because they are cruel, because they are patient. They think in generations, in centuries. Their genetic program to breed the Quasits Haderach ran for 90 generations. 90 generations of cruel control of heredity for one person. But that's not even the most impressive part. The Missionaria Protectiva, a program launched thousands of years ago. Sisters traveled to every inhabited planet and seeded local cultures with prophecies, specially constructed myths about a messiah who would come from outside, with specific creeds, speaking specific words. Why? Insurance. If a sister found herself on a hostile planet, she activates the prophecy, demonstrates the right signs, and the local population that has waited centuries for exactly this provides her with protection and an army. Religion as pre-deployed control infrastructure. Lady Jessica on Arrakis does exactly this. She doesn't believe Paul is the Quasits Haderach. She is Bene Gesserit. She knows the mechanics from the inside. But she uses the prophecy coldly and deliberately, because it's the best survival tool available. This isn't villany, this isn't hypocrisy the author condemns, this is simply how real power works. Colonial history is full of missionary protectives. Catholic missionaries arrived in new lands decades ahead of armies, studied local beliefs, inserted Christian narratives into local myths, created syncretic cults that made populations receptive to European authority. This was called conversion. By function, it was preparation for conquest. Divine mandate has been the favorite tool of imperial expansion through all of history. The British carried the white man's burden. Americans carry democracy. Every empire arrives with a narrative about how its arrival benefits those it absorbs. A narrative is cheaper than an army and more effective. Right now, Spring 2026, messianic expectations are at historical peak simultaneously across several traditions. This is not a coincidence of sacred cycles. This is a coincidence of crisis. People wait for a messiah when systems stop working, when elections change nothing, when the market only works for those already at the top, when the future feels not just unpredictable, but closed. In such moments, the need for a figure who will fix everything becomes almost physical, almost irresistible. And precisely in such moments, people appear who are ready to play that figure. Paul Atreides understands the mechanics all the way through. He knows the prophecy was constructed, knows Jessica deployed it, knows the Fremen believe in him not because he is special, but because they need to believe. And he uses it anyway, deliberately, coldly, speaks the right words, strikes the right poses, wins the right duels, becomes a messiah the way a political strategist becomes their own candidate. At the moment he stops being someone fighting against the system. He becomes someone reproducing the system, with a different face at the top. The most terrifying thing in Dune is not the villain in black. The most terrifying thing is the hero who sees exactly how the machine works and pulls the lever anyway. We rooted for Paul the entire film. That was easy. Chalamet is magnetic. Zendaya is breathtaking. Timmy raises the hair on your neck by his music, and when Paul wins we feel catharsis. But Herbert wrote a sequel, and Villeneuve, an intelligent man, doesn't end the second film with triumph. He ends it with death. Paul looks forward, and in his gaze there is no victor's joy. In the books, what happens after Paul's victory is called the Jihad of Muad'Dib. A holy war in his name burns across 18 worlds, billions die, more than all the Harkonnens killed across their entire history, more than all there was of the great houses across centuries. Liberation became the most terrible subjugation, just under a different flag. And Paul knew this. He saw it in his visions before he ever drank the water of life. He knew where the road would lead, and chose it anyway. Herbert didn't write Dune as the history of a chosen one's triumph. He wrote it as a warning against our own hunger for a savior, against our willingness to hand our agency to someone who promises to solve our problems, against a system where the only answer to bad governance is to find a better ruler rather than change the structure of power itself. Because a better ruler is still a ruler and the machine keeps running. A handful of families, one resource, an entire civilization addict, wars that never end, nations dying in the poverty of the richest land, messiahs who arrive and make everything worse, just under a beautiful flag. We know this story, we live inside it. The question isn't whether there are Harkonnens among us. Of course there are. They are part of any system. There is a resource, power, and no accountability. The question is different. Who are we in this structure? A great house that genuinely believes it manages its colony better and more justly than its predecessors and reproduces the same structure anyway. A Fremen waiting for a messiah because that's the last hope, ready to shout Mahdi at the first person who says the right words. Or, and this is the most uncomfortable option, are we Paul Atreides, a person who sees the system all the way through, understands that the prophecy was constructed, knows that victory will turn into a new war, and still does what the system expects, because he couldn't find another way. Frank Herbert died in 1986 and gave no answer. Not because he didn't know, because the answer has to be found by each person on their own. Denis Villeneuve made 2 films and gave no answer. He also held up a mirror and stepped aside. The mirror is still standing, and in it, us. The only reason we don't see ourselves in the Harkonnens is that we haven't ever looked honestly enough. You can start right now. Leave one word in the comments, Atreides, Harkonnen, Fremen, Chani, or your own, if none of them fit. I am not asking rhetorically, seriously. The next episode, we go deeper. I am Vadim Jason, this is Lord Navigator. See you there.